The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. I've got, after last week's call to action for Mike McGrady, he's here.
I bet he listened to it and he felt bad.
I think that's probably right. Mike.
Wait, what?
Oh,
he didn't
listen to it.
No.
Nope.
We were calling you out for totally,
for
bailing on us.
We were talking about how we missed you.
And we were talking how we missed you. And you're like, I wonder if he's ever going to come back. And here you are a week later.
There
you're back.
Yeah.
So,
apparently,
we're glad to have you back.
Apparently, I should have downloaded it while I was traveling.
It would have been good to listen to.
Yeah, you should download it while you're
We didn't
traveling.
get any angry text messages or anything from you. I'm like, I didn't listen to it.
Well, I'll be traveling again this week, so,
Well,
I guess I'll have something to listen to.
That's right. So, anyway, welcome.
Welcome, Dave.
Nephi.
Why are you looking at me?
Nephi, welcome.
Yeah, well, welcome, Dave. Welcome to my office.
Yeah, it's great to be in your house.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So I want to start this podcast today with
I actually am going to trick you.
You're going to trick me.
I'm going to start the podcast.
So I have to wait for my legal disclaimer?
You have to wait for your legal disclaimer.
Okay.
Because we talked a lot this year about some of the stuff that you'd been up to and doing, and you dabbled in the world of long range hunting.
Dabbled, yeah.
Dabbled with 350 yards.
Yeah.
Well,
330.
330.
Yeah.
I have a gift for you from our friends at Vortex Optics.
Is this what... is this really what... Oh my. Holy... I want to keep this
And
family
Mike?
friendly.
For you also.
Thank you, sir.
Oh my gosh. This is unreal.
It's Christmas in January for Dave and Mike.
This is so cool.
I talked to a good friend of Vortex Optics, and they made sure that as you guys are kind of branching into the longer range shooting world, that you guys now have an optic that's capable and will meet your needs. So they sent over for each of you a Vortex Razor HD LHT 3-15. Which,
oh my gosh,
this is an awesome hunting optic. This is going to be it's light.
With all the packaging in the box, this is lighter than than the scope I'm running right now.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Nephi, this is amazing.
Well,
Yeah.
don't thank me. It's like,
And yeah,
Well, thank you,
and
Vortex.
thank you to Vortex Optics. Holy smokes.
I've got that same optic on my 6.5 Creedmoor.
It really is so light.
It is so light.
What's amazing is that like the glass,
It's not that big either.
I'm kind of an optic snob. This is a really nice optic, and so for the weight, it's incredible. So it's on my 6.5 Creedmoor, and it's got I'll show you. We'll walk through it after the podcast, so everybody doesn't have to listen to you ooh and ah about it. But I thought that you guys would probably really enjoy having those on your hunting rigs. I think they'll make for a good upcoming season.
I am oohing and ahhing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I could spend the next hour just talking about this.
Yeah, so that 315 optic weighs 19 ounces, and it's super, super capable. I mean, it's got adjustable parallax. It's got a great turret on it, so the top turret's adjustable turret. So, and I'll talk with you guys about that, about adjusting for.
This is the same thing you have on your 6.5?
That's on my 6.5.
So no competition with three of us.
Yeah, I'll show you this.
No, they're all the same thing.
So, but if you like this, I can show you how mine's set up, and then they're also sent over for you. And thanks to Ruben, honestly. And so they also sent over for you some rings and a bubble level.
See that?
Yeah, and it's all their lightweight stuff. So it's really ideal for a hunting rig, because I know you joked with me before about you went to get an optic before, but it was so heavy that you basically you sent it back.
I did you
don't have to tell everybody what it was, but
no, I think I've said it before. I won't say what it is, but I think I told you before. My wife got me this nice optic for my birthday one year, and it was just too heavy for me. And it was set up to be able to do long range shooting, right? It had the turret and everything like that. But it was, for the type of hunting I do, it was so heavy. I ended up returning it, which didn't go over well with my wife.
Yeah.
I will say that to anybody listening, that if your wife, like, she goes to the extent to do some homework and get you a really nice scope, and it turns out it's not exactly what you wanted.
Keep it anyway.
Keep it anyway. Lesson learned. But this weighs half of that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is it's HD glass. So with all that said about the weight, the glass is really, 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 really good. So it's you're gonna like that optic. I love mine, and I've got a couple optics that are similar. I use that on my 6.5, and I've got they call it an AMG on my 7mm, my Rem mag. But it's a nice optic. I think you're really gonna like it. So I guarantee you I will. So huge thank you to Vortex Optics. Huge thank you to you, Nephi. Yep, we'll take time later, and I'll talk with you. We'll go to the range, and we'll get your bullet speed, and I'll talk to you about like kind of how to figure out, because this, one of the other nice things about this is, rather than just having a standard like a ballistic compensating reticle, I'm a big fan of dialing for elevation, and this makes it super easy to dial for elevation, because you can also put, like, once we get your bullet speed for what you use, you can actually put that straight on the turret, so that you can hit something with your rangefinder and then just dial to the exact yardage on your turret, rather than having to kind of cross-reference which, 2 minutes of angle or 5 minutes of angle or whatever. You just like reach up, turn it to 300, and then that's your crosshair is now on at 300. So we'll talk about all that later.
That's amazing. And just little secret.
Go ahead.
I'm contemplating actually purchasing a new rifle this year.
Actually buying a gun. Buying anything.
No, I've been thinking about this for a little while, mainly because my kids are getting of age to shoot, and we talked about how my daughter and our daughters were together in this, and they shot the .223 for deer, but that's not a legal caliber for an elk, right? And if she wants to shoot an elk, she needs a bigger caliber. And I'm thinking of giving our friends at Wyoming Arms a call and
talking to them.
Oh,
that'd be really cool. They'd love. That'd be a good choice.
So anyway, man,
there you go.
That's
awesome.
Now it's your turn.
Thanks for being here on the Your Mountain Podcast. We got to run off. We got some things to do now.
That was legitimately. I didn't tell you guys I was going to do that. So
no, you didn't.
Surprise!
So that is a great surprise, Nephi.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Super awesome. All right. So we can just wrap up the podcast at this point, so we can go.
Yeah, right.
If you want to go sit in a pit and not shoot anything, like that's my pit this season. So we can go tomorrow if you want.
Have you shot anything since we went?
I have not shot a goose since you and I went up.
That was Thanksgiving
Day.
Yeah.
And I have not shot a goose since Thanksgiving Day. So I gave you what I shot that day.
Sounds like bad.
And now I have nothing in my freezer.
Do you want it back?
No, I don't want it back.
Sounds like bad karma to me.
All right. Well, I cleaned it, so.
It was a great day. And yet, here we are a month and a half later, and I haven't even fired a shot again. It's been a rough season.
That's all right.
Anyway.
I shot enough that day for you. So.
Well, I shot too. You're forgetting how that actually went down, I think. We both did some shooting.
I said I shot. I didn't say I killed.
Oh.
I shot a lot.
That was a fun day that Nephi was invited to participate in and chose not to. He picked family over friends.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's how that goes.
Live and learn.
Well, I'm still married, so I don't regret it.
So am I.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I can jump back into all right. Big disclaimer at the start of this. We're now partway into this. Big disclaimer for today. Because the main topic we're going to talk about today is corner crossing. And we'll get into that in just a second. But before we do that, I want to do a full-on legal disclaimer here, especially for Mike and myself. Mm-hmm. This issue, I mean, if you go to a chat board at any hunting chat board around the country, and do a search, you're going to be able to find strings of conversation about corner crossing, especially for hunting in the West, where there's these large chunks of public land intermixed with private lands.
Yeah,
there's a lot of discussion about it.
Quick description: corner crossing.
Yeah, we were going to get to that.
Checkerboard.
First, he's just going to do a legal disclaimer.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I was going to do the legal disclaimer first.
Yeah.
But yeah. So because it is such a as you'll hear as we discuss this, it's pretty nebulous. It's not crystal clear cut. And so what we are doing today, I do not want it to be construed as us giving you legal advice,
nor should it ever,
nor should it ever, right? But in particular here, this is not us giving you legal advice, and things that we say, if you wind up going out and doing some corner crossing and getting cited for it, I don't want anybody pointing their fingers back at us and said, well, those guys said, we could do it. This is
on you, bro.
This is not, this is
informational purposes.
We're providing
only.
information here, and we're going to try and provide all of the information here, and just view it as it's informational purposes. This is an edutainment, right? And please do not rely on this as legal advice. We are not anybody's attorney here.
That's right.
All right. Is that fair enough? Do you need to add anything else to that, Mike?
No. And if you did, it's worth every penny you paid for it. Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that being told, we are going to talk about corner crossing.
That's all we're going to talk about.
No, we're not.
Oh.
We're going to talk about one more thing just briefly before we get into the corner crossing.
Different type of crossing.
Different type of crossing.
Crossing state boundaries. Okay.
And other boundaries. And right. If you'll recall, we've done a couple of episodes on the Herrera v. Wyoming case. And you'd have to go back probably a year or more to listen to those episodes. We did a couple episodes on those, and the Herrera v. Wyoming case is, for those that are not familiar with it, and a refresher for those that are, is a case that involves an interpretation of the treaty, the Fort Laramie Treaty, the 1868 treaty between the United States and, in this instance, the Crow tribe, which is a federally recognized tribe with the reservation for that tribe is in southeast Montana, right along the Wyoming border, but on the Montana side, right? And the issue in dispute was this: is what is the extent of the hunting right offered by this treaty of 1868? Because it allowed for off-reservation hunting on unoccupied lands of the United States so long as game persists. Right? And so the dispute here was about a few members of the Crow tribe that came into Wyoming during a closed season, elk season, under state law, and killed several elk and were issued citations for illegally harvesting elk out of season, and then asserted their treaty right. And that made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that statehood, that Wyoming becoming a state, did not invalidate the treaty right, and nor did the creation of the Bighorn National Forest. Right? And then remanded that back to the circuit court, the state circuit court in Wyoming, for further proceedings about what is unoccupied lands. Are there any unoccupied lands of the U.S. for purposes of exercising this off-reservation hunting right? So that's the very basic. Did I miss anything on that? That's sort of the high level. Yep. Here's what happened. If you want greater detail, go back and listen to our earlier podcast episodes on this Herrera v. Wyoming case. So there have been, in the past few months, a couple of new developments in that. And I think we touched on this back in June of 2020. The circuit court judge in Sheridan County, Wyoming, issued a new decision on that question, and effectively adopted it was the Alito dissent in the Supreme Court case that the tribe was really precluded from asserting that they had this right because by what's called, I think it was the issue preclusion. It was an issue that had been the exact factual scenario involving the exact language of the treaty with this tribe in this forest, the Bighorn National Forest. The exact facts had already been litigated, and issue preclusion would prevent relitigation of that issue. Right? And so the district or the circuit court basically took the dissents, the telegraph from the dissent in the Supreme Court case and issued an order consistent with that. That is on appeal now. It still has to go through to the district court in Wyoming, the Supreme Court in Wyoming, before it would have a chance to get back to the Supreme Court in the United States. And I believe my understanding is there are briefing schedules already set at the state district court level right now. So that case is moving through there.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So that's going on. That's a quick update. Then there's one other thing that happened in the past week or so related to that case that is actually unrelated to the facts of the case at all.
No, it's just gossip.
It's just, well, it's not gossip. There's a criminal complaint filed. So, I mean, there's not gossip. There's some underlying allegations here, right?
So Mr. Herrera has never been proven guilty of the trespass or the hunting violation. And so he's presumed innocent. And the next thing you're about to say, he's presumed innocent on that too, just for clarity's sake. But what happened? Innocent.
Correct. So that poaching case is still out there pending a resolution of all these, up and down the different court cases. Well, he was also recently arrested and charged in Montana, and this is according to the Missoulian. I just got this the same way most other people would from a newspaper article that was presenting this. But he was recently arrested on several charges. He was arrested for actually. The initial investigation was into drug charges.
So allegedly.
So possession of and distribution of dangerous narcotics.
Allegedly.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. All of these are allegedly.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to repeat it.
You don't need to repeat it. We asserted that. Mike asserted that. So strangulation of a family member.
Okay.
Theft. And then the one that really, when you see it, it just sort of causes you to pause a little bit, and it's child pornography.
This individual was a game warden at one time?
Chief game warden.
Chief game warden for the tribe.
Yes, like the head of the game wardens for the tribe.
Right, law enforcement officer for the tribe, and then now accused of
a lot of
criminal activity.
Pretty like stomach churning kind of.
I think
criminal
he has
activity.
pled not guilty. Am I correct?
He has, I believe he has. He or somebody has paid. There was a $75,000 bond, I believe. For
I think it was 70.
Was it 70? Well, it was something like that. Anyway, it's in the. I'm just rehashing what's in. So if you want to read about it, we can. I don't know. We can probably post that article on our social media if you want to link to it. If we had social media, but. Have we been banned?
No, I banned myself.
Yeah, that's true.
I left.
Did you?
Yeah.
All the platforms.
But
if I was,
it's available. It's available. You can find the story at the Missoulian. So Missoula, Montana's newspaper, the Missoulian, on their online version. It's a story you can follow.
Okay.
It creates a complication certainly in this case. Right, in this hunting rights case.
Yeah.
And this is complete speculation. But, from my perspective, if I were being represented by if somebody were the named plaintiff representing a group of individuals and I were part of that group of individuals, I would have some heartburn if that named person had these types of allegations on their plate. I think there's got to be some folks wrestling with that right now.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Anyway, that's the update on that. And I want to do that update not just because this article came out, but we actually have had some feedback from some folks, more than one that have written in saying, "Hey, where is this case? Like, what's going on with this case?" And I understand that question because when you get into the state circuit and district court levels, cases just sort of disappear off the radar.
Yeah, unless you're buying the local newspaper and looking at the blotter.
Right, exactly. So there's your update. All right. Anything else to add on that, or can we jump into, or hop into, or cross into? I'm trying to find a pun that works.
Crossing. Who knows?
Corner crossing.
Let's talk about corner crossing.
Yeah. Who wants to tee it up? One of you guys tee up like.
Well.
Why don't I tell you everything I know?
All right, do it.
Okay.
So this will be short.
Okay.
So in the West, we have private property, and a lot of it is checkerboarded. And there are spots when you think of a checkerboard where a square and another, 4 squares line up. And there's a question on, can you cross over at where they all point together? Now, in private property laws, we traditionally have had it in the United States. If you own a piece of land, you own it from the center of the earth to the starry decks of heaven. So you can think of this like plane of light shooting up, from the base of the earth all the way up to the sky.
I think of The Truman Show.
The Truman Show?
Remember that movie with...
Jim Carrey.
Yeah, with Jim Carrey, where he's living inside a domed bubble.
Yeah.
Like think of each parcel as The Truman Show.
But rather than having like an arched dome, you have straight to the forever. Now, I mean, still there's ability to regulate in airspace and light space and all that. But just think of it that way, in that you have everything up, and it's down to that sort of micron level where the corners meet.
You know what's really interesting about that is because it actually doesn't really work in science. And so we think about this legal definition of it as like these lines and they go, but this is going to get really wonky, but this is reality. The projections of a circular Earth don't actually work on a flat piece of paper with these perfectly straight lines, especially when you consider that the different elevations involved and all this other stuff. It's like everything on a map is an imperfect projection of reality.
Yeah.
And so we write these legal definitions based on this concept of this perfection of these corners, but it's actually not perfect.
Yeah, and all I'm describing is the point at which your rights either cease to exist or begin to exist, depending on which direction you're walking, right? What are your private property rights? And one of those rights is sort of, having dominion over your own area, deciding who can come onto your private property or not. There's all kinds of exceptions to that. But the idea, though, is that when you're crossing at that corner, in theory, if your foot never touches the neighbor's property and you just go from your one spot to the next, some portion of your foot broke the plane. The infinite plane going into the air, right?
So can I walk you back? I have a question for you.
I will not answer.
Not walk your position back. I just have a question. No, I think I'm not questioning your position. I just want to, before we continue to explore this, just for a quick history lesson, I guess, for folks. So first of all, we're going to talk about checkerboard because that's the easy one to talk about, but recognize that this applies any place where you have an intersection, this type of intersection of lines. And it's not just first of all, it's not just in this area we call the checkerboard. That's just
sideline crossing too.
It's just easy, right?
Right, yeah.
And so because we're going to talk a lot about checkerboard, my question is, can you give us a little history,
of the checkerboard?
Well, yeah, what? I mean, we've talked about it before, but why? Talk about why we have this to begin with.
Well, it depends on, there's a variety of reasons on why we have it. And I think we did an episode on it.
Yeah, we did. Is this a short-time refresher?
The short-time refresher is Manifest Destiny and the settling of the West, even back east too, when there were different lands that were acquired, and sometimes they're public lands, sometimes they're private lands, and they're all intermixed. And, you have some bigger chunks than others, but at some point you had to draw out and define boundaries of public and private land.
And in the West, right, this is, this is really common in some of these Western areas. For example, Wyoming's checkerboard is that way because what runs through the center of it.
Yeah, the railroad.
The railroad.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happened is, in order to basically, the U.S. government didn't have enough money to pay the railroads to give them enough incentive to make a road across the middle of nowhere. You said, hey, how about we give you a whole bunch of land?
Yeah, and they created this system, township range sections, right? This whole grid system for dishing out, doling out lands for homesteaders.
We're going to take a circular Earth. We're going to pretend like it's flat and smash it flat, and then we're going to draw lines through it in a checkerboard shape. And then what we're going to do is, because it helps us build civilizations, we're going to give every other piece to the Union Pacific, and the federal government's going to keep every other piece so that they can give it to homesteaders, whatnot. And that was the idea, is that
it was never going to be federal land forever.
No,
right? The idea was it was going to be used to settle the West.
Yes.
Yeah, and even states, when they came into the Union, generally received 2 sections per township.
16 and 36.
Yep, 16 and 36 square mile.
Generally, in order to fund public schools or some other specific purposes.
So it was land in lieu of cash, which they didn't have. And then also, I think it's worth noting, one of the issues that sportsmen always wonder is, like, how come when you walk across this, it seems like every place along a river, all the good spots are taken by private land. Because they're all taken by private land.
Because those are the only places in the West that you could make a living when you could homestead.
Yeah,
Yep, and that's why.
Yeah, and there's been there's even some of those private lands that were acquired in the homesteading era that ended up reverting back to the United States, the Bankhead Jones Act areas, and some of those in the Thunder Basin National Grasslands area. And so there's a real telling of history just looking at the maps. And I'm just fascinated that Nephi's not a flat earther. I've learned that today. I would have thought you were. Just knowing
I'm taking
you.
a lot
I
of
still
things.
think he is. He's just taking a neutral position right now.
Okay. All right. So, still possible.
I think it's still possible. No?
Only for artillery. Well, if you're calculating artillery, it's best to just pretend like the world is flat. And if you want to blow something up, but you have to also understand it's not.
So here's the controversy. I'm going to move on from this flat earth thing. Here's the controversy that everybody comes up with. Mm-hmm. Like, they see a map and they see these public lands touching each other at a corner. And they think, why in the world shouldn't I be able to go there? And, to take it a step farther, it's like public land. Like, this is our land. That a hunter might think, this is my land, right? This public land, this is my land, and I can see it. I'm walking up to the corner of the fence. I can see it. I can put my foot on it, and I don't even have to touch these the private parcels.
Right.
In theory.
And I can do that mile after mile after mile for
miles,
right? Because I think it's 20 miles, at least through this state. I think it's 20 miles on either side of the rail line. So north and south of the railroad is checkerboard, and you know how that checkerboard. I mean, you can take it up and you can take it down diagonal, and I mean, you could spend weeks out there corner cross and just be on private land the whole time. And so hunters are thinking there are literally not just hundreds of thousands, millions of acres that fall into this category of having no.
It is the reason that the TRCP, when they identified states that have the most inaccessible public lands, they're actually talking about checkerboard in Wyoming, is why Wyoming is number one. They're talking about those lands.
Right, exactly. And to be clear as we get into this discussion, so there has never been, and this is why this discussion gets so nebulous and where we're going to go, there has never been a federal law enacted, never, that defines what property rights are with respect to these corner crossings, whether it's a legal act or an illegal act to cross at these corners. No federal law. And near as I can tell, there's no specific state law that specifically deals specifically with corner crossing issues.
I think you're right.
Which means that the question is left to the individual state and the state's interpretation, and beyond that, down to the very local level, to a specific district game warden's decision and the county attorney's decision and interpretation, and how they're going to apply it. And so 2 states
made an effort to clarify it. So in 2011, the state of Wyoming had a bill in front of the legislature that would have clarified it as being legal. And in 2013, Montana did the same thing. Both bills didn't get out of the legislature.
Right. And to the same token, I don't think Wyoming did this, but Montana, I think in 2017, had a bill to go the absolute opposite way and formally make it an illegal act to do corner crossing.
Also died.
Yep. So the attempts that have been made in multiple states to formally weigh in one way or the other tend to die under legislative weight or the committee weight and never see the light of day. And so you're left with this. There's really no specific law anywhere in the country, in any jurisdiction in the country, that says, yes, you may do this, or no, you may not. But there are plausible interpretations of the law that can be applied and have been applied.
Of the statutes or of the common law?
Yes. Right? of both.
Yeah.
Right. And you knew that.
I just wanted you to, because the reason we have our private property rights the way we do, for the most part, is what we've inherited from essentially European, law that came over. In some areas, French, but it's one of those things where you go back to the common law that existed before the United States as the founding principle of a lot of these things, and then statutes come in and overtake that common law and identify what would need to happen in that area. So the fact that we don't have clear, specific information leaves it to a lot of interpretation.
Yeah, it does. And I think what you'll see as we go through this is there is a lot of interpretation. So let me roadmap this a little bit and then we dive in. Right?
Okay.
I think it would make sense to have a discussion, and we can do it on a state by state. We can give a couple of state examples of how they've applied the law and some of the interpretations out there, both from federal law, state common law, so forth, how they mix together. We can talk a little bit about that. I'd like to spend some time also talking about possible solutions to address this issue, because it's a significant issue. We've talked about it before. I know, like the National Shooting Sports Foundation put out a report that
we did. In fact, I have that up. I'm impressed that you pulled that up in 2017.
Yeah.
It was part of our national, not ours. I mean, because I'm not representing the National Shooting Sports Foundation. I'm the Your Mountain podcast. We read anyway. This group called the NSSF has this great report about hunter recruitment, retention, reactivation. And from that report, and it's significant, you can go online and download it if you would like to. Anyway, in that report, it notes that access is one of the top limiting factors to people continuing to participate in hunting and the shooting sports. And specifically hunting, Montana, it talks about Montana specifically. Montana, you had in 2016 180,000 hunters. In 2018, that number dropped to 168,000. And that's because when people were asked why they quit hunting, it's because they quit having places to hunt. And this is a big issue. Anytime you have inaccessible areas for people to hunt on public lands, specifically is what we're talking about, it causes problems. So,
and just to put this in perspective, how much public land we're talking about that is in the public domain, that the public owns, right? I don't
remember the number. It's huge.
It's over. Well, so what I was going to say is
public lands can't be accessed.
Yellowstone National Park, one of the largest national parks in the lower 48 states, is about 2.2 million acres in size, which is larger than I'll probably get this wrong. I think it's larger than Delaware and Rhode Island combined. Is Yellowstone National Park. It's larger than two states. I picked the two smallest, thinking that's probably the safest bet to say it's larger than, but it's larger than two states combined, right? There are over 9.5 million acres of public land in the country that have no, and I'm going to be careful how I say this, no permanent legal access to them.
That's right. So some of those places you can get to, but the question about whether or not you could get there tomorrow and be guaranteed that access is in question.
Right. Because I want to be clear, there are places like in Southwest Wyoming with the Rock Springs Grazing Association that has opened up not just access for public lands, but to private lands as well.
So they allow the
hunting on both public and private lands over several 100,000 acres, right? But that could easily be turned off tomorrow. It's not a permanent legal access from that's held by the federal government. They're providing legal access through their permission and their good graces to both public and private lands. And there are hunter access programs in almost every state that set up programs whereby landowners will provide access, and that's all contractual, and it can go away at the end of the contract period, right? So there's that. I do want to be clear about that, because just because there are 9.5 million acres that don't have permanent legal access doesn't mean that there are 9.5 million inaccessible acres. And I know that's always a sticking point for some in the landowner community that say, well, a lot of us provide access. It's just not formalized.
That's right. So just to clarify, it's provided as a courtesy. It's not a guaranteed access.
But anyway, at the end of this, I'd love to talk about some solutions, some ideas, and I've got a few written down. Maybe you guys have some thoughts too about some ideas to address this issue going forward. So, but before we do that, perhaps we go back to some specific examples in states.
Different states and how they handle it.
Yeah.
Well, one of the challenges is that, like you're going to say, states handle this differently. So, for example, some states are fence-in states, some states are fence-out states.
Explain that.
So in some states, for example, the state of Utah, and I hope I'm getting this right, but I believe that I am. In the state of Utah, if you don't want somebody going on your land to hunt, it is assumed, unless it is posted or cultivated, they can go on there. And
hunt on it.
Because
in Wyoming, you can't hunt on it.
That's right. But in Utah, and I pulled it up, and if I'm wrong, somebody from Utah can send it to me and tell me that they're mad at me for getting this wrong. But in Utah, if you don't post it, and somebody's on there, like, you can go kick them off, but they're not going to get in trouble for being on there. They're not going to get cited for being on there hunting unless you tell them specifically not to be on there. And so the way for you to do that is to either go up to them and tell them you cannot be on here, or if you post it, then the assumption is that they should have known that they were on there. And so Utah's DNR, in fact, tells people once you do post it, they're supposed to go and take pictures of it so they can prove later on, if they get mad at somebody, that they actually had it posted. Now, if it's cultivated, then it's just assumed that if you have a cultivated field, that you should know that it is private property and you're not supposed to be on there. So you have to have permission in those cases. If it's posted, you have to have the written permission. If it is not posted, if you don't run into that fence line where you would think that it's posted, then you can hunt on there. My understanding is that Idaho is the same way. The Idaho also is one of those states where if you don't want people on there, you'd better have it posted. You can't be on here again, unless it is cultivated, or what was the other, cultivated or fenced, posted.
And Wyoming would be a hybrid of that. So in Wyoming, we have two different types of trespass here that we deal with, and one of them is hunting related. So if you are trespassing for purposes of hunting on that private land, it is a strict liability. Like, you are required to know where you are at all times. There's no responsibility of the landowner to post anything there
if you're hunting.
However, the criminal trespass statute is, you could, if it is not posted and marked, and you want to hunt public land, for example, and you're going to walk across this open field to get to public land. If it's not posted or fenced or otherwise indicated that you're put on notice that you are not to be there, it's the landowner's responsibility to fence you out. If they don't do that, you can walk
not for the hunting, but for just a criminal trespass.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep. And I don't know if you're going to go into this further, but it does make it kind of this unique argument, right? Of like, if I'm going to spot A and it's not posted, can I walk across this 100 yards that's not posted if I'm not hunting it? And so that would be the argument. You say, like, well, I'm not hunting. My gun, for example, is unloaded and it's in 7 pieces in my pockets or something, that's not going to, I'm just, I'm overdoing it here. Right. But that would be like, I'm clearly not hunting until I get to this spot.
Right.
But when I get to that spot, now if I'm hunting, the game and fish rule applies, because under the game and fish law, the act of hunting is automatic trespass. Whereas the other one, you have to be notified.
Right.
So that means somebody has to tell you either A, don't be on here verbally, or B, with their sign, don't be on here.
Right. So in Wyoming, you are not, if it's not posted, you are not trespassing until you decide, I'd like to hunt here.
And now you are.
And now you're trespassing.
If it's on private land, you don't have written permission.
Right.
Or you don't have permission. But they recommend you. In all these, I would say this to everyone. If in doubt, make sure that you get written permission. And that's just not even a question. Get it written someplace on a piece of paper that you have permission. And I say that because I have some friends who have, nodded their head at the landowner saying, like, yes, you have permission. And then later on, they're like, well, I didn't really mean permission to that spot. And they said, well, that's not what you said. So then you run into this awkward situation where, it's not in writing. So get it in writing if you're going to be crossing, if you're going to be hunting on private lands. And there's a question.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go into some examples here. And I think the easiest one for us to start with, and then I'd like to start in Wyoming and we'll move out from that. Mm-hmm. It's the easiest one for us to start with. Plus, since it's one of the states that has the most checkerboard land or legally inaccessible public land, it's a good place to start too. And I know there's a lot of interest in hunting in the West. So I'll just tell you this. So I started at the Attorney General's office, the Wyoming Attorney General's office in 2005. Started working there. And I know Nephi because you've got it printed in front of you.
Because I have an opinion from August 25th, 2004, right before you got there.
Just before I got there.
Yeah.
An opinion is issued. Let me give the factual background, and then you maybe jump into some of what the opinion said if you want.
Okay.
So in Albany County, Wyoming, which is in southeast Wyoming, in Albany County, there was a hunter that went out, and GPS technology was relatively new, but it was starting to become more widespread. I don't want to say that new. It was becoming more widespread, right? And more people had GPS units, and they were using those to find their way for public lands. And this elk hunter had used his GPS, handheld GPS, to locate a survey pin on the ground at a corner. And with that pin, knowing that pin, he crossed from public land to public land without ever setting foot, having his boot touch the ground on the private land that was also part of that corner, right? And he wound up being cited for trespass for that corner cross. And that found its way to the circuit court judge, who ultimately dismissed the case. And basically said, well, I guess that's the factual background. I'll say basically, and then we'll get into the legal. So let me give you what he said, and then you go into some of that argument. But his basic contention was he knew exactly where he was. There's the survey pin. He didn't put his foot on the ground, and he didn't see any legal basis for that would make that act illegal of crossing. Now, a circuit court in this state, there's the decision from the circuit court isn't precedential, even on the circuit court, or certainly not on the district court or the state Supreme Court. So this decision had no precedential value, meaning it didn't apply anywhere else. It didn't set in stone what the law was, and it wasn't like, okay, you see the results of this case. This judge throws this individual case out based on the facts of that case. It doesn't mean, oh, well, corner crossing must be allowed everywhere. That's not what it means, because there's not a legal precedent for that. But what came about? I'll take it to the next step and then kick it to you, Nephi. So
okay.
what came out?
Kick it to my attorney, Mike.
So what came out after?
Grady.
What came out after this is, because of this decision, the Game and Fish Department made a request to the Attorney General's office, and perhaps at the urging of a county attorney, I'm not entirely sure, saying we'd like an opinion, a legal opinion from the Attorney General on corner crossing. Is this something that is permissible in this state or not? And so, as frequently becomes the case when a legal question like this arises, the Attorney General may choose to weigh in and provide what turns out to be a guidance document for the state. And that's what happened here. And this memo that you have, this legal memorandum that you have, Nephi, was a result of that case.
Well, I have to say, if somebody's intent was to provide guidance through this document, they didn't do a very good job. Because my reading of this is that basically what the Game and Fish AG did was punt. And what they said is, the judge in this case didn't really, corner crossing may still be a criminal trespass, but it may not. And there's not sufficient evidentiary stuff for us to make a decision here. And so the Game and Fish, my reading of their advice is their wardens aren't going to be handing out any tickets for that type of trespass, you're going to have to call the county. You're going to have to call the county sheriff to do it in situations of corner crossing. So that was my read of what Game and Fish said.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think so. The game,
because they said basically this isn't for hunting. They didn't hunt on your lands. That's not us. We don't do simple criminal trespass. That's not Game and Fish's job. If you want to get mad at somebody for that, you call the sheriff.
But the opinion did say it may constitute, depending on the facts of the individual case, it may constitute a criminal trespass.
Yes, they didn't say that it did or didn't. I mean, that's exactly
right. I said may. It's the
you're trying to provide
the ultimate wiggle word for a lawyer.
Great job not giving any guidance to anybody in this case.
Seems clear to me, though. So,
Mike, take it away.
Well, I'm not going to give out legal advice,
right?
But if you read this, you read between the line on this, yeah. But it basically the opinion got to the idea that we. In this instance, we didn't have a trespass to hunt, but it could be a criminal trespass, and recognize that passing through the space above private property, in other words, breaking that invisible plane, that may be a criminal trespass.
It may be, but somebody hasn't argued it.
Well, yeah, there have been multiple. I mean, that's been argued in multiple places in multiple states at kind of this circuit court level. And in most instances that I can find, the judge tends to throw those cases out if the facts, if the facts look a lot like the one that I just described in Wyoming, where somebody knows exactly where that corner is and just steps across it and causes no property damage and doesn't set foot on any property and doesn't create any nuisance or interference with the landowner's enjoyments of their right or anything like that, of their private property rights. They kind of just say, it's not really worth our time.
Right. This wouldn't, there's not much to deter here when someone's gone through so much effort.
And
it's as a standalone crime.
Right.
And I think that, and I get it 100%.
In fact, there's actually some guidance in Washington State. This is an interesting one. I don't know if you...
before you get into Washington State, back up and realize some of the challenges you'd have to have in this too. And this came into play in a case in Montana where you have an ongoing battle between, and you may...
I know what you're talking about.
About whether or not you can corner cross or cross private lands to get to public lands to hunt. Now, the difference is in this Montana case, which I'm sure you're going to cover, you have people who are loggerheads for a specific amount of time, and there's been discussion going back and forth. One of the things that makes this challenging is, let's just assume you're in, somewhere in Wyoming or some other state, and you decide to corner cross. In Wyoming, at least, again, the Game and Fish, to immediately be trespass, that's the hunting law, right? When you're hunting, there's no need to notify. You're hunting, you're trespassing. In the other case, there's a requirement of notification.
Right, which gets to the may. That's why there's a may
because,
be violating.
Again, if that corner is not marked with no trespassing on that corner, or that landowner's not there yelling at you, don't trespass on my corner, or not telling you, calling you up on the phone saying, no, you may not cross on that corner because as soon as you do...
Or if there's no fence there at all.
That's right. Then for the criminal trespass, you haven't met the bar of because they get that one strike, unlike the hunting side, where if you got the gun, you're in trouble.
Yeah. I'll actually, when we get to it, happy to have you talk about the Montana case. What I was going to tell you on the Washington side was, all I was going to say is Washington applies it similarly to how this case was applied in Wyoming. In fact, there's an article out there, I don't remember who wrote it, but it has an interview with a Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Coordination captain. And basically what he said is, in Washington, enforcement takes a common sense perspective. And this was the quote: if someone knows where they are, or the direct quote is, if somebody knows where they're at, I just have a tough time saying the at part, but if somebody knows where they're at and they're correct, and they step from public to public without setting foot on private land, they're not trespassing. No Washington officer that I know would cite someone for that. They've just made a determination. And I think, to Mike's point, their legal conclusion that they're not trespassing might it could be incorrect. But there's also they have to look at workload and caseload and, is it worth the effort that goes into it? Right.
Which is also why we probably don't have a clear answer. If it doesn't come up enough to have the development of analysis around it.
Well, and there's politics associated with it too. And so one of the challenges that you have with trespass, and this is certainly the case in Wyoming, is that there are landowners in the state of Wyoming who just, they don't want public access on stuff anyway. And so, even if there's, you could, for example, you could legally get to some places in the state and never have that issue. You could access state lands in Wyoming, for example, from a public road and go hunt those lands. And if you have landowners who control the general access, so let's just pretend that we have a state section in Wyoming that you and I, Dave, could hike into. We can access it from a major highway. We know there's elk there. You and I can put in a 3-mile hike, and we can be behind some private ranches and just in the elk, right? And you and I can get in there in a herd of 300 elk and shoot elk, and we can pack them back out through that same, if we're willing to put in the work on the boots.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, those private landowners who own the ranches between you and I and the road, where let's say the road is only 1,000 yards away the other direction across private. There are a lot of landowners that are very very protective of that strip of land because there are advantages to them to limiting public access to the herd of elk that you and I are hunting. And so even though you and I can come across the top from a long distance and hunt that, when they see us in there on the state lands, they get super grumpy. Why? Because they want that to be theirs. Those are their elk. They feel like they have some kind of ownership to it because they control the access.
They have their own outfitters, right? And
that's right.
And they're selling opportunity.
They make money off of those elk. So even though they're the public's elk, even though they belong to you and I and everybody else, part of their business practice is, taking $800 off the top every time somebody wants to shoot one of those elk. And when you and I hike in from 3 miles away, that precludes them from earning $800. And so that's, so they are protective of it. So even in cases, again, the politics of it are in cases, even where it's legal, where it's cut and dry, white and black, they would still get angry. They still would not want us there.
And this leads to a good point. So they tend to cite to two, landowners do, as supporting their position, cite to two U.S. Supreme Court cases. And I like to talk about them for just a minute because I think they're worth some analysis. I don't think they're necessarily 100% on point with one of them, at least. But two...
Which one?
We can get to it.
Okay.
So the first one I want to talk about is this U.S. v. Cosby case from 1946. So this one is pretty clear cut in my view. Anyway, so this is, if the result here, this gets into the who owns the airspace, right, above the private land. And the Supreme Court weighed in on this and really says, if the landowner is going to have full enjoyment of the land, he must have ability to have exclusive control of the immediate reaches of the enveloping atmosphere. Basically, if I'm going to want to build a structure, I want to build a house, or I want to build an outbuild, I want to do some kind of structure, nothing can impede my ability to do that on my private land.
You get as much right as you can do on your land.
Yep.
Whether that's a skyscraper or trees or whatever.
Yep, exactly. So they didn't go as far as saying you own everything to space.
Right.
But they did say, they own a lot, right? But the idea was airplanes flying because this all came about with airplanes flying a little bit too low. Mm-hmm. And so, airplanes can't fly so low, or now drones or other things can't fly so low as to impede the landowner's use and enjoyment of the airspace for that sort of thing. I don't have any problem at all with that decision and the interpretation of that decision that landowners that landowners have of saying we own everything from the ground up, right? I think that's probably I get it.
Yeah.
The second case I have, I think it's been stretched a little bit. The interpretation. You know which one? Yeah, the Leo Sheep. Leo Sheep Company.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's a Wyoming case.
Yeah, it's a Wyoming case. And it specifically is addressing checkerboard lands. I mean, this is a case that's, when you start reading it, you're like, man, this is on all fours. This is pretty close, but it's not quite. Right.
Well, it gets to one area that people might try to get around the idea of being able to cross over.
Sure. It gets to one piece of it. Mm-hmm. Right. So in this, we have a big reservoir. Actually, it's one of my favorite places to fish, Seminole Reservoir. Right? That there was you couldn't access Seminole Reservoir because of the checkerboard. There was no way to get to it. And so the federal government made a claim to was it an easement by necessity? I think is what they were, I think effectively it was an easement by necessity.
Implied easement.
Or implied easement.
Yeah, because they get back to the days of when the railroad received checkerboard land, and the question was, would the federal government, in its wisdom, decide to create a situation in which they couldn't access their own land, right? Or would there have been an implied easement, like everyone would have known that we'll do this checkerboard because we can create a road that goes through at the corners.
Right. And that's what they actually did.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they actually created the road that went through at the corners, and that led to this lawsuit.
Correct.
And really, my read on the Supreme Court case is they were very specific to this road construction issue. Right? It was very specific to building roads to cross these corners to access this implied easement. And there were two things. One of them is saying, no, there wasn't an implied easement for purposes of building a road, and it was very narrow in that, building a road. So all other access issues around getting from section to section were not addressed by the Supreme Court. It was specific to road. And then they also said the federal government still retained the power of eminent domain. So any argument about an easement by necessity, because there was an implied easement, mm-hmm. but then I think there was also discussion about easement by necessity. Yep. So it was like, if not this, then this. And the idea was, well, the federal government can never really have an easement by necessity, which is this, there's no other way I can get to this property. You buy a piece of property, you want to build a house on it, and you need to have a road to be able to get to your house. There's an easement by necessity to get to that house. That's kind of a loose. It may or may not happen, but the court was saying, well, the federal government still has the power of eminent domain, so you can never really have an easement by necessity, because if you need it, you can just take it. You can just assert eminent domain, but that's a secondary issue. I think the important one here is that issue about building a road for crossing corners has been taken and used by landowners to say that applies to everything as far as being able to access at these corners. But I think
that's very confusing. I want you to nutshell it real quick.
What I'm saying is, I think the case that's been relied on, this Leo Sheep case, the case that's been relied on by landowners to say that the Supreme Court has recognized there's no legal right to access from corner to corner, is
faulty because it was dealt with the federal government.
Because it dealt with the federal government and building roads specifically, not the general public and walking across.
Yeah.
Part of it is, if you build a road and have an easement, an implied easement, and you're building a road, then you'd have to provide the landowner with compensation for...
Yeah, because you're taking ground. It's like a road.
It's a takings.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you'd have to provide compensation.
And in that case, what you're saying is that, well, that probably doesn't work, because if the federal government really wanted to do a road, you just do eminent domain to do your road. It's like you're making the wrong argument. The wrong person making the wrong argument is what you're saying.
I'm saying the issue that we're talking about is, I don't believe is settled by this Leo case, this Leo Sheep Company. Mike may agree or disagree. He may not.
Yeah, I think but you're describing it as, is it settled for you and me walking on someone else's land, as opposed to the landowners who are saying it's settled that there's no assumed easement at the corners.
Right.
It may be the most analogous case they have.
Oh, it certainly is, but I don't think it settles it
because
completely.
these two things are not necessarily the same thing.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And the Supreme Court's really good about just taking the very narrow issue that's before them and leaving all other issues to be dealt with in a future case.
Because you're not claiming an easement at the corner anyway.
Yeah, but if you're a private property owner, what you're saying is that this case does not do away with the presumption that I have the most exclusive, my right to exclude people is my sacrosanct number one right. And so just because the checkerboard's here and there's an impossibility to access public land doesn't mean that somehow there was this oopsie, we forgot about an implied easement. I that's different than trying to approach it from a different angle.
You know what's unique? It's as if these two issues, let's just pretend they're a checkerboard and there's a slight corner where they meet. And the problem is it gets so infinite, these arguments get so infinitely small that it makes it extremely difficult.
So let's talk about this. We have the legal framework. I mean, if a state wants to make an argument, they can make a straight-faced argument that, I think a pretty strong straight-faced argument, that corner crossing is illegal if they want to do that. And I think they can try, even though I maybe disagree with a little bit, they can rely on the Leo case. I think they don't need to rely on the Leo case. They can rely, for example, on this Cosby case, as far as the airspace, owning the airspace, and that it doesn't matter if you don't put your feet on the ground. The line, to your point earlier, the line is so infinitely small that you can't help but pass through the airspace when you're trying to cross. And so I think that's where you could make that argument, and it would have some teeth. There's no on-point statute, but if you really wanted to prosecute somebody for trespass on a corner cross, that and state statutes talking about owning the airspace combined might give you enough to do so if you meet also, to Nephi's point, the fence out requirements of notice in the states that require notice, for example.
And it really gets to the point of you're trying to say these two cases are more about eminent domain issues, more about the regulation by the government in some way that impedes the ability to use public land as originally intended. That's different than a private citizen, because if I go walk in a corner cross, I'm not the government taking.
Right.
So that's a whole different issue than those two cases. But there's the criminal trespass element, but there's also the private trespass element.
The civil piece, right?
Yeah.
But for a civil trespass, you probably have to, you'd have to show some kind of damage to the private property. And if you're going to...
It's usually physical damage, actual damage, rather than...
Like the emotional trauma that I'm caused from having to constantly patrol my boundaries.
It would be a question of whether that the loss of revenue, because suddenly everybody can corner cross and get to these areas.
This is actually... So somebody's going to say, this isn't just... It's unjust enrichment, because your corner crossing allows you to get to my elk that have been on me, and... So therefore, you are taking away from me. Somebody will make this argument, I promise.
But that argument won't work, because wildlife is owned by nobody.
That's right.
It's held in trust for all people, right? So that argument's out there.
But I think Nephi's trying to say that your prior example of how you and Dave needed to walk 3 miles to get to public land that was 1,000 yards from the road. Suddenly, if there's a corner cross ability, they've lost their ability to lock people out and charge for that access.
And so they're going to claim that as civil harm.
Yeah. To charge to public land.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely ridiculous and unfortunate, but it occurs. And let me say on this, in most cases, I'm absolutely you do not trespass on private lands. You just don't do it.
I'm with you.
That said, you 100%, I believe it is equally grievous for private landowners to keep the public, to try and find nebulous ways to keep the public out of public lands that they should be able to access.
And the government agrees with you. There was a law passed, the Enclosures Act. I think it's called the Federal Enclosures Act, where if landowners were trying to enclose federal lands for the purposes of trying to keep the public out, that's illegal, and they can be forced to remove all of that fencing and everything. And, it was so to your point, like there's a recognition, there's an agreement with you on that.
That'd be the Unlawful Enclosures of Public Lands Act.
Thank you.
1885.
Yes,
okay.
That'd be the one.
I've had to deal with that in a couple cases.
But I still think on the civil side, I think you're right that might be the argument that is made. But on the civil side, I think the more likely scenario is the likely damages are probably around $0.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And no judge is going to, like, if I'm a lawyer, I don't want to take that case in front of a judge for $0 and have and have that judge just ream me publicly for wasting his or her time with a case that has a remedy of $0, a civil trespass type of case. It seems exceedingly unlikely that would go well, right? That's my opinion. The other piece of this that I don't know that we've talked about much, and we've got more stuff to talk about, but there was an interesting study done from 2011 to 2015, something like that, where this was done, it had radio collars on elk, and then they gave GPS units to hunters. And they were tracking both elk movement and hunter movement relative to pine beetle kill areas. And they were just trying to see, okay, one, how does pine beetle affect hunter movement? And how does it affect elk movement? And the conclusion, best I could tell, was that there is some impact to elk movement, but that there was very little impact to human movement because humans stay so close to designated roads. They just don't walk far. So when we're talking about these checkerboard areas where we're talking about 20 miles either side of a rail line, we've started this discussion and it makes it sound like everybody that's shouldering a gun is going to be out there getting in line to go cross these things if it were somehow legal. But at the end of the day,
only Steve and Ranella.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, only accessible to Steve and Giannis.
Mike knows that I've always been I got to see over the next ridge kind of guy.
Yeah.
But even I'm not going to go 20 miles, in one go.
That's right.
On
the
my
farthest
feet.
I've ever gone with you is 13.
Yeah.
See, not 20.
And it makes sense because there's a practicality aspect of if you shoot an animal out there, it doesn't matter how fun it is to make that hike. You got to bring the animal back.
Now you got to make that hike multiple times.
See, I get what you're saying, but selfishly, I mean, you're talking about the actual checkerboard area along the railroad.
Oh, yeah.
Where we hunt, sometimes it would be really nice.
Oh, it would shave several miles off for sure.
Miles.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Hours. But it would do it for everybody.
You're right. So there would be places that would see a lot more traffic for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also a lot of places that might see one dude in the fall, like if this were allowed, because it's just so far. And are you going to go that far without ever having had the opportunity to scout back in there? Are you going to go that far on the hopes that something's passing through and then pack it out?
This brings up a real
how many days, right?
Yeah,
brings up a real interesting shading of this access issue that's actually dealt with in that NSSF 270-page report, which it talks about. There's different concepts of what access even means, and we're talking about at the most simplistic nature. We're talking about stepping from one corner to the next corner as access, but usable access is, that might be access for 2 or 3 guys. If you say corner crossing is okay, but that doesn't mean, like, let's just say that corner crossing becomes legal in Wyoming, and suddenly would we take all those lands that we said were publicly inaccessible before, and now TRCP has to redo the report? We go, nope, now the public can absolutely access those lands. That's great.
But can the public really access it?
A few of them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the issue that we run into as sportsmen. It's part of the issue with growing the sport is because there is a certain exclusivity that we all actually kind of like.
Of course.
Right? which is that, well, if I know this area that I can get into because I'll put in the work, but nobody else can get into. And in a way, we're almost being like that landowner. We almost are trying to lock other people out. We're like, yeah, shut down that road, shut down everybody else's access except mine.
Yeah, I'm saying the Leo sheep case is great. I don't want roads going all the way out there.
But I
want to be able to walk.
You just want to be able to walk out there.
I want to be able to walk out there.
And it
until I can't.
It is unique.
Yeah, right. And then I need the road.
It is unique when you think about it, though, right? Because, it is, without realizing it, we as sportsmen, we tend to do this. That's why bow hunters and, after they got a bow season, they don't want crossbows in it. It's why, rifle hunters don't, you look at all these different things, and it is within our community where we do. We get these opportunities to improve access to the sport, and then we try and, sometimes we try and whittle it down so it's just really just access for the way that I want to access it. And that's something to be aware of and be very careful of, because, again, it might be great as a member of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, for me, if I want to go hike in there, I don't want anybody to be able to access a spot unless they have to hike the 3 miles like Dave and I did. It's probably better for the future of hunting and fishing if we can get an easement for a 2-track road to go the 1,000 yards across that landowner's place and have everybody be able to go there and park and hunt.
So you're jumping to solutions really quick. You're jumping ahead to solutions. So do you mind if I go back?
Yeah.
For a minute? Because one piece I don't think we've covered. Well, one, you haven't talked about the Montana cases. I don't know if you want to or not. But before you do that, the one piece I do want to cover is, let's talk a little bit about resource limitations that county prosecutors have and that sheriff's offices have. That sort of thing. Because I think that plays into this corner crossing issue as well, right? I'm going to use the county we're in as an example. So we're in a county where we have a district attorney who's saying, based on the budget restrictions that I've got, that I'm being, because the state's struggling financially and I'm being asked to cut resources, and so I don't have as many attorneys and I don't have as many resources to be able to prosecute cases. I have to make a judgment call on the cases I'm going to prosecute. And so I'm going to focus on domestic violence and felonies, like violent felonies.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And not mask ordinances.
Not mask ordinances.
And corner crossing.
I believe she specifically said not mask ordinances. Right? But also, right, Nephi?
Yeah.
Not corner crossings.
Yeah.
Like if somebody writes up a corner crossing and it comes across her desk, I guarantee you that case does not get prosecuted. Just doesn't. And so then the question is it worth the time for the sheriff to drive out from wherever they are to this super remote location to interview this person, to write them a ticket for something that's never going to get prosecuted? Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of that around the West, which is why a state like Washington makes the judgment call. Like, if you know where you are and you know where you're going and you're not putting your boots on the ground on these private lands, they're just not going to write a ticket because they have bigger fish to fry. They got bigger issues to deal with, and maybe they have county attorneys that have no interest in trying to prosecute something like that anyway. Or maybe they have county attorneys that do have interest but don't have the resources to do it, and so it doesn't get done. Which is why this becomes such a case-by-case, location-by-location issue, right? And why there are really very few citations and even fewer prosecutions for corner crossing. And the examples I can find where people know where they are, know exactly where the corner is, and cross at that point, wind up getting dismissed. I can't find an example of a conviction. Maybe
no, you're right.
Maybe others can.
No, I think,
and then I think that analysis builds into your Montana example.
Yeah, and I'm not going to belabor it because I'm not familiar enough with all the aspects, but just know that there is a long-going issue between a specific hunter and a land and the land management, the ranch, where they've for specific time have been trying to keep him out of areas that he says I get to go to. And they've had, he's had numerous cases dismissed against him. And he's also had, I think that there's some that are still pending where he's pushed it. And so there are, corner crossing, and then there's some where we're just crossed private land to get to a piece of public land. And so if you've got details you want to fill in, go ahead.
I don't. I think
I think
I have one. I mean, one example is very similar to the Wyoming example, which was where he knew exactly where he was and he crossed at a corner, and the judge saw that and actually relied on a 1986 memorandum written by by a prior county attorney, and said we're not going to prosecute these, and here's why we don't view it as an illegal activity, and they relied on that. And then there was a subsequent case where I think there was there were some questions about the surveying of the lands, right? And he went through a place where it looked like there was this 80-foot gap or something.
And he was guilty.
And he was guilty on that.
Yep,
because
and they appealed it to the Montana Supreme Court, and they upheld the decision.
Right. So he didn't, they weren't all dismissed, but
that's right.
The ones that were similar to the one we talked about in Wyoming and the situation that's described in Washington State, like the cases that are similar to that in Montana seem to get dismissed.
So
do you know if that individual lost their hunting privileges?
I don't believe so. There's another there, and this article is from, let's see, this year. So February 2020 says there's an ongoing case here, same individual, where they are suing him for again trespassing. He's saying I have a prescriptive use because for 5 years I was doing this.
That's right, and that's still to be determined.
That's right. So I've been doing this for 5 years, and you never tried to stop me, and I wasn't trying to hide it. So therefore, I get to keep doing it. So
that's an interesting legal argument. That'd be interesting.
So putting all this in your tanks,
I don't think that prevails. By the way, based on my understanding of it wouldn't prevail in Wyoming. Maybe Montana's
different. What I was thinking.
So listen to this though. Here's the challenging part. Ready?
Yeah.
The challenging part is, as sportsmen, even if we could do it, even if we can do it, and you don't think, because it sounds like the likelihood of you having somebody come out and actually write you a ticket for it is pretty dang low. It's pretty low. But what does it look like when it happens? That's the part that's really just unfortunate and just a bummer, is because having somebody out there who has decided that it's their, who's going to be grumpy about it no matter what, it's bad for sportsmen. It's bad for us to look like we're taking advantage of the system. And I'm not saying that means that it's not our right to do it, but I'm saying, boy, it's a real bummer that, you could probably go out there and you may or may not ever get in trouble for it. But just realize if there's some landowner out there getting mad about it, they may get mad no matter what.
Well, so I think if you have a legal right to do something, you should be allowed to do it, right? You should be allowed to do it. And some of these jurisdictions are saying we don't think it's criminal activity and you should be allowed to do it. In those cases, you should be allowed to do it. Here's my concern.
Yeah.
And it's not a concern that would have me say nobody should do it. But if everybody were to just say tomorrow, you know what? Forget this. We're all going to start we're just going to do this. Make them enforce it.
They'll make a law.
It's not going to be the sheriff you have to worry about.
It's the legislature.
It's the legislature you have to worry about.
You're exactly right. Yeah. And that's the issue right there, is that it's in some ways we get to do these things because of because we have a social license to do so. And we need to be very cognizant of how far we push that social license, because if we go too far and we make enough people mad, we might lose our social license. So even though we might be able to do it now, we might not be able to do it tomorrow. So you got to be cautious.
The other side is if everybody just says we're going to stand down and not do it, you don't need a law anyway. Nobody's doing it, right? So, it's sort of a danged if you do, danged if you don't situation, I suppose. Yeah.
And I've got to say, honestly, like Dave, even though the landowner might get mad at you and me for hiking in, I'm going to hike in. If those elk belong to the state of Wyoming, they belong to you and me. That land, it belongs to us. It's public lands that belongs to every one of us. We all have the right to access it. If there's a legal way for you and me to access it, we're hiking in. And I don't care. I mean, I care. I feel bad.
So let's talk about how we make more legal ways to do it.
Let's do it.
Solutions, some ideas, right? So let's throw out the most bombastic one first. FLTMA, which we've talked about a lot. There's a section in FLTMA that specifically authorizes the BLM to use eminent domain for purposes of securing access in places that don't otherwise have access.
Oh, that's insane.
Did you know that?
Nope. And I'm thinking, somebody's thanking you right now. There are attorneys for some organization right now there is, huh?
There is a provision in FLTMA that
How often has it
authorizes
been used?
Not often at all. And from a legal standpoint,
where is it in FLTMA? Are you going to give everybody the reference?
You want the specific reference?
Well, you might as well give,
Section 205A, expressly authorizing the BLM to acquire property through eminent domain only if necessary to secure access to public lands.
And Dave's hourly rate is, what's your hourly rate? Oh, this is not legal advice. I'm sorry.
I'm not giving legal advice.
That's right.
It's something that's very rarely used, and I think it's appropriately very rarely used, right? So that's thrown out the most bombastic. Like, there is authority there, and there's general authority under eminent domain, and the fallout from was it Kilo? What was the, not Kilo? What was that that case in the Northeast back in about 2005, 2006, dealing with the use of eminent domain? Keto, thank you, Keto case. That was that allowed or recognized that it was okay to use eminent domain for purposes of economic development, effectively, for a community. And so there's and then actually there hasn't been a lot of use of that since then for that purpose, but there is the ability to use eminent domain. Eminent domain is wildly unpopular with anybody that owns any property anywhere. Like, I don't like it, and I own a postage stamp lot, right? I mean, I don't like the idea of using eminent domain. So, yeah, is it allowed? Yeah. Should it be used for purposes of opening up access to all of these places?
You think so?
I think there are other routes we can
Just
go.
kidding.
So tearing down from that, the second alternative that comes to mind.
Yes.
Congress at the federal level could step in and write a law that allows for corner crossing to access these properties, right? A federal law for access to land management, or to land, to federal lands. States could do something, individual states could do something similar. And like you've mentioned, some states have dabbled in it, at least a couple. Again, that one's pretty fraught with controversy. But certainly that would be, a more appropriate avenue than eminent domain is engaging with, at least in my opinion, engaging with your elected representatives to have a conversation about that, rather than going down the...
But with eminent domain, don't you get just compensation?
You do. And what I'm saying is, it is
the avenue to make it happen.
The avenue to make it happen.
Sure. Well, it'd be a broader application, more universal application.
Sure, you'd have consistency.
Where with the eminent domain, that's kind of a one at a time,
right? Ad
hoc decisions and pricing and all that.
And the current approach, where it's left at the, it's just sort of a piecemeal all over the West on how how things are applied. So you'd create some uniformity in application. So that's a possibility, right? Effectively, you could decriminalize formally corner crossing. I don't know if that's the best way to do it either. In my mind, one of the best ways to do it is we have the recently permanently authorized and permanently funded LWCF, Land and Water Conservation Fund.
Where we could now purchase easements. Yeah, I love that idea.
And you don't have to purchase the land, right? So, the landowners still own land. You have an easement that's wide enough for a body to walk through, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting. I actually talked, so hopefully everyone who's listening to this, send a text Land Tawny and tell him that he has to listen to this podcast because we all mentioned him, because I had a conversation with Land about 4 years ago when all of us were sitting behind different desks. And there was this issue in Wyoming that came up where a piece of state lands was being proposed for sale, right? It was going to basically landlock this area. And one of the options that Game and Fish had was an option where they were going to do an easement. They would maintain, if they sold if the land changed hands, they were going to maintain an easement for hunter access to this area. To which I threw out the idea is like, why doesn't your organization start, get an arm of your organization and start buying easements. Start buying a hiking easement into these places. I mean, because we know that these lands exist. They're all over the place. If you and landowners often, they don't want to sell, they don't want a road going through their place. Well, but it's just like you said, do a 24-inch wide easement along the fence line.
Yeah, a walk-in easement.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just think it'd be awesome to see a lot more of that happening, and I think it would be huge for sportsmen's interests.
I don't think it would cost a lot of your LWCF dollars also to open up just tens of thousands or more, hundreds of thousands of acres of access.
You're thinking that's the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah, and to build off of that, TRCP actually has a pretty good idea out there. Did you know? I mean, if you want to know, okay, of all the federal lands out there, what lands have permanent easements to them or not for purposes of getting to these lands? There's no database out there assembled that's easy for you or I or anybody at the BLM for that matter to go into and say, okay, here's my state, here's sort of the county I want to hunt it, where what lands are accessible, have an easement. You
can't go into Onyx right now and pull up the layer that shows me the easements to get into that spot.
You can't find that stuff. And
we're not sponsored by Onyx, but we should be Onyx.
but TRCP has a pretty good idea that's saying with an improved, easily accessible, and publicly available database of existing easements, then the BLM would know what they have there, and they could prioritize the use of the funds that they have, LWCF, whatever, for purposes of getting other access or easements. And so that would be a good investment of resources, is to figure out how to build that database. And maybe that's something that can be done with the help from folks in the nonprofit sector as well, partnering with the BLM to help put something like that together.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back and say this again. I know I was joking about this commercial, a commercial enterprise that could do it, but a commercial enterprise could do it and should do it. A company like Onyx, I mean, that's why they were formed in the first place. It's a company that said, we can give you access to these ownership layers and it's going to make your life better. You're going to pay this much a month. That type of a company could go in and could partner with local governments and could actually have a financial incentive to collect this data and to put that out there. So just something to think about, for all you folks at Onyx who should sponsor the Your Mountain podcast. We gave you this idea. It belongs to us for a slight fee. You can have it.
I'm sure they're thinking of that too. A lot of people are thinking of that idea.
No, we came up with it.
It's not our idea. It's our
idea. It belongs to us.
But I think one of the first steps is the BLM really knowing what they have, and Forest Service and all the public land agencies knowing what they have from an access point, and then being able to aggregate that into a system that the public can know what they have. I mean, it's public land. The public should know where they are legally able to go right now. And right now, I don't think the public knows. They have no way of knowing because the BLM doesn't necessarily know either.
You know where these good maps have come from? They haven't come from the BLM.
Right.
I mean, I said it already. I'm going to say it again.
Yeah.
It's these private companies. Onyx did this, and they do it by going and talking at the county level, by going in and collecting data. That's very hard. We tried to do this when I was at NRCS, and we did the same thing. We had to go into to each county, to the system that they use, to figure out whatever projection system that they use, and you have to harvest that data and bring it out and recombine it, because all these systems, this disparate government entities, they're storing the system in different ways. And it's going to be the same thing with the easement data. That stuff is buried, and somebody has to go in and track it down and find it and then put it in a common format. And it's not easy.
And update it.
Yeah, and update it. And updating it won't be as hard as building it in the first place, but you have to dedicate yourself to updating.
Updating won't be as hard as building it in the first place if you can get all of those counties to buy into using it.
That's true.
And then uploading their information to it as a universal, which it's a possibility. But if you had to go every 6 months and look at the same things again, granted, you're not gathering everything. You're only looking for that 1% difference, but still effort.
Well, and that's one of the nice things about easements. If you do this the right way, you do it once. I mean, having been with NRCS when we did conservation easement scenarios, I know that there's a part of the argument there's a lot of people that would prefer to have a 15-year lease agreement versus a permanent easement. boy, it's a whole lot easier if you make those easements permanent.
Of course.
Where in perpetuity, yeah, because can you imagine the challenge it would be if they said like, well, we've got this spot for 5 years. And actually we deal with the state game and fish agencies, right?
Yeah.
With hunter walk-in areas that change because somebody might change their mind. Whereas if you do things with permanent easements, then you have that agreement in perpetuity that you're going to be able to have access to those specific locations.
Although there is some benefit to having a term agreement too, because you can do a test run. You can build, the landowner can develop trust, and maybe they wouldn't have been interested in a permanent one, but the term went so well that then they'd say, okay, now I'm up for a permanent one.
Yeah, I see the value.
The landowners I've talked to about that type of thing is the reluctance to do a permanent one is they're like, okay, I can talk to my son and daughter, and I can talk to a little bit to my grandkids, but I don't know what my, the next generation after that's going to do.
Yeah, it's the fear of binding future generations to something that they are talking about doing today.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, that's the value too for the conservation group or the hunting group. Is like if you're basically, if we're talking about the future, let's call it a conservation easement. Yes, I understand people are like, well, I don't want to put this ranch into a conservation easement so that it can't be developed forever, because who knows if my great-grandchildren don't want to build hotels here instead. The value to the conservation group in purchasing that easement is like having that long term.
There's never going to be the hotel there.
Yes, and that's the reason that you're doing it. And so, but it's a little bit different, and so I understand that. Yeah. But I mean, there are arguments on both sides for doing it both ways, certainly.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, last idea, and then if you guys have ideas too, throw them out. We haven't talked about land exchanges and consolidations and so forth. I mean, that's a time-consuming process, and it's usually just a little piece here and a little piece there. But we've seen examples of it where you can really consolidate lands and create opportunities for access to, instead of one square section, 640 acres, you might, through some exchange, open up 3,000 acres by doing some consolidation and exchanges, and that's an idea too. And there's some benefit to that, both for the sportsman, but also for the landowner, right? To be able to have all of that land all blocked up.
Yeah. So there's also a unique counter argument to this. You ready for it?
Yeah, bring it.
So, for example, the checkerboard in that section of Wyoming that we're talking about. Right now, that section of Wyoming that's managed in checkerboard down there around the Rock Springs area, the Rock Springs Grazing Association, the huge private landowner.
I see where you're going.
They allow everybody to hunt there. So right now, you have access to 100% of those Rock Springs Grazing Association acres, and you have access to all of the BLM that's around it. So what happens if you consolidated all that?
Right.
So, suddenly, you have access to 50% as much land.
Right. So why would you pick that as a spot? So my point is you're going to prioritize where you're going to do your land exchanges, and that's not going to be a high priority location.
I'm just saying it's something it's something for folks to think about, because in some areas these areas that we complain about
less
a little
access
bit,
as a result.
Yeah, they actually their geographic disparity gives us more country to cover than we would be able to cover if all that were, if all those acres were in half as much area rather than spread out. So it is just a unique thing to think about.
It is. But we also see examples where it truly does create access that you otherwise wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
So that's a conversation about prioritization for sure.
Well, and creating a system where there's an agreed upon process for valuation, identification, valuation, and making the deal happen. Because everybody looks at the value of land a little differently, and it's a long process to go through and figure out, well, is this particular land worth more than another, and why?
Can I now make everybody really terrified?
Okay.
This is something that it's critical that we do all this ASAP, as soon as possible, like soon. If you care about the future of hunting and fishing, this isn't something that we can spend a lot of time on and kick the can down the road. Do you know why? Because
there won't be as many of us.
There's not as many of us, and the social tolerance for hunting is diminishing every year. And so can you imagine right now, where we have the numbers, where we can make something like this happen, and we can guarantee that access, which then brings more people out and helps us with our numbers.
And if we're the ones that help it, not just helps us with our numbers, but actually could potentially help with the social tolerance. If you see hunters leading on creating access for everybody,
yeah,
those folks that are benefiting from that additional access can look to hunters and say, okay, I see some benefit to continuing to have hunters engaged.
What happens
in these issues
if legislative leaders, if elected leaders start caring less and less about us and our complaint that we can't access a piece of public land?
They just don't care.
They just don't care. There's no reason. And in the future, the more urbanized people get, the more they look at their Xbox for how they're going to spend their time and Facebook for how they're going to see the great outdoors, the less and less impetus there will be to create access for us to actually get to these spots. It will become irrelevant and unimportant. And we are marching that direction at an incredible rate of speed.
That's another reason why the permanent funding authorization for LWCF was right now was so important. FYI, kind of building into that. I mean,
So I hope I frightened everyone.
You motivate. That's not frighten. That's motivation, right? That's be involved. That's all I had on this. Do you guys have anything else you want to add on the corner crossing? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yep.
And it only took us an hour and a half.
Whew. Maybe we should break this into 2 episodes. We'll see.
No, we're not going to do that.
All right, you're gonna have to listen to a long episode. But there's a lot of ground to cover, and it's really nuanced. And as you can tell from the discussion we just had, it's not cut and dry. There's no yes or no answer on corner crossing. There just isn't.
So here's the invitation for, we're not going to do another episode on this, but here's what we will do.
No, what I was saying is, should we split this one that we just recorded into?
I know. What I'm saying is, for those folks, make us do more work. Where does this rabbit hole go, and what do you want to talk about now in relation to this? And we'd be happy to cover some of these other topics and how you get there.
If this opened up an idea, you have some questions out of this that you think could make an interesting topic for a podcast, let us know. Yeah, always interested in that, for sure. Something that makes Mike really have to dive in and work hard.
Yeah.
While he's sitting on an airplane or in an airport or,
it's not,
or on a golf course. I'm not convinced you do any work where you go. You just send pictures of you in Porsches.
It's not gerrymandering, but if you have something you want to talk about, we're happy to.
By the way, I'm not kidding. I see pictures of Mike traveling, and he's sitting in Porsches, drinking, not while he's in the Porsche, but drinking fine whiskeys and sitting on golf courses.
He doesn't send me those pictures. I don't know why.
I'm not convinced there's a lot of work going on these trips. But.
That's because I won't say it. I was going to say because you and Mike work for different kinds of companies, different kinds of entities. Dave and I work for nonprofits, so
we depend on the Mikes of the world for our existence.
There's no Porsches for us.
It just was a fluke. It was a fluke, which is why I had to send a picture.
All right.
Always ask for the upgrade. That's the secret.
Yeah.
Always ask for the upgrade. You never know what happens.
It's not like we were driving. They picked us up at the plane.
In a Porsche.
That sounds practical.
It wasn't because of my status. So
every time I've been deplaned on the tarmac, I have to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I'm put on a bus.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the usual. And this one there's not a lot of travel going on. So they're using they're using their vehicles.
Some Porsches around. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like you're making a bunch of excuses up, but none apply.
Well, anyway,
it was fun.
I'm glad. I always enjoy getting your pictures because I'm not allowed to travel anywhere.
Says Dave sitting in the fetal position and sucking his thumb.
Why don't I get to travel anymore?
Good discussion.
Great discussion. I got nothing else. You guys good?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you again, Vortex.
Oh yeah, man. Thank you so much, Vortex. I'm excited to check this out. Yeah. That was awesome. So thank you so much. And thanks everybody for listening. As usual, we really, 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 that's right, 3 reallys, really appreciate you listening and continue to support the Your Mountain podcast. And remember, as always, until next time, life is about experiences, so go have one.